I'm still thinking about the idea of what fundamentalism means, and I'm trying to advance it. Suicide from Celluloid's made a good video picking up on some of those ideas, and comments from Piro and one or two other folk have been really helpful. What I want to try and do now is just jam a little bit around some of the, again, metaphors. If you're not interested in metaphors, look away now. Metaphors to do with that. What I was saying is that one of the dominant models that we have for looking at knowledge is as if it's a kind of structure or a building or an edifice, something that starts at the bottom and grows up. And a lot of the kind of embodied understandings of what that means feed into our understanding of what knowledge is. So something that starts low to the ground and grows higher gives a growth towards the light. So there's a lot of light metaphors. The Enlightenment project is part of that. You know, as we build our knowledge, we grow towards the light. The metaphors to do with how, with difficulty, are part of that, which kind of relates to something Anna Kantervat was talking about as well. That the growth of knowledge, whether it be formally or just a kind of knowledge of experience, is often quite hard, as if you're working uphill. Whereas losing knowledge, forgetting, is easy. And having knowledge fall out of a society is easy. Just burn a few libraries down, burn a few books and library down, knowledge disappears. Just like the demolishing of a building is easy. So again, the entailment of building to do with working against gravity as opposed to working with gravity feeds into that, and so on. So this idea that knowledge is some kind of an edifice or a growth or a pile of stones, a cairn, a pile of stones that you often find on top of hills, where if you add the sum total of human knowledge, it's like you're putting a rock on the top of that pile of stones. Again, that's part of the same metaphor. And within that contains the idea of a foundation. It contains the idea of a fundamental. I don't have to invent that idea. It contains the idea that this thing has a base. It has to be solid. It has to be firm. It has to be permanent. It has to resist damage, because if it's damaged, the whole edifice comes down. It has to be in contact with the earth. So the idea contains fundamental. So when we just think about knowledge, we think it has to have a foundation. And the idea that it might not just makes no sense. But the sense that it's making or not making is, I would say, part of that idea. Suicide for Celluloid put some interesting stuff in there. Hi there. And he talked about primacy and first principles and a reduction. Talked about a lot of other things as well. But primacy is interesting, and first principles is interesting. Because just to relate it to the building metaphor, when you are building something, or when something is building itself, in the way that a tree perhaps does, because tree metaphors feature in knowledge quite a bit. There is a first move, there is a first principle. The seed germinates first, or the first brick is laid down, the first foundation is laid. So it does happen first. So there's a time dimension to this as well as the spatial dimension of building upwards. There's a time dimension. So primacy, the thing that comes first, is often considered to be the most important. And there's a little bit of bleed into other kind of metaphors which feature here, journey metaphors, or climbing metaphors. The first step on a journey is the journey of 100 miles or 1,000 miles begins with the first step. It's that kind of idea. So we're starting to get little bits of other kind of time-based, perhaps journey-based metaphors. Climbing Mount Improbable is how Dawkins describes one of the evolutionary journey. There's the ascent metaphor is there, the going up, the hard struggle up the hill, like up the hill of a kind of accumulated biological information, as if the kind of knowledge which we are, not that we have, but the kind of knowledge that we are is being accumulated by this step. And that's a hard climb, but it begins with the first step, which I don't know what that would be. So there's that going on as well, isn't there? But it's not the only metaphor. One of the things that Suicide for Celluloid is talking about is metaphor, how knowledge features within some of the softer sciences, or some of those practices that you might not call sciences at all, but nevertheless have something to do with human understanding, if not conventional knowledge, like sociology and psychology, which are often uncoverings of the world, apparent stripping away well, actually, they're not about uncoverings. That's the thing, isn't it? Science is a kind of uncovering. You know, yeah, sociologies and psychology are often kind of constructive, and you know you're constructing something. You know, when we talk about the invisible hand of the free market, we know that our market hasn't got an invisible hand. You construct the idea of that because it has explanatory power. I was talking recently about patriarchy, and I think that's one of those. There isn't an organised cabal of gentlemen who met, who started meeting hundreds of years ago, and slowly built up the patriarchy from that first step in an organised, a carefully ascending fashion where each stone was placed carefully on the top of the next. It wasn't that kind of an organised process. The development of patriarchy, as we understand it now, is seen in retrospect. We look back, and there is the data of history laid out. And if we think about it in the right way, we can see patriarchy laid out there, and then we can ask ourselves: is there something? Are we seeing something useful there? We can see the path that we've come along up this hill. Perhaps can we use that path to figure out where we might want to go next? Is it a real path? And feminism and all the various other narratives of history, Marxism, which in Suicide with Celluloid, in your terms, would be about going from a descriptive to a prescriptive understanding of philosophy. Can we look back at history and see it as a series of power conflicts, and think, that's just been the story so far. Do we really want that story to continue, or shall we make a different path and struggle up a different slope? There's something going on there, isn't there, about that, which relates primacy to this. I'm reminded of that Walter Benjamin quote. I don't know if this makes any sense at all. There's a quote from Walter Benjamin where he's talking about the angel of history, and it's this image of what it's like to be at this point in history, and the angel of history. I'm trying to remember the exact quote. This is how we view history. It's an angel who's looking backwards at the beginnings of paradise, but there's a storm blowing from paradise, and the storm keeps blowing the angel backwards, and the wind from the storm is caught under the angel's wings, and it's blowing it backward into the future. So the future for the angel is back there, and the angel's eyes are locked onto the past, but it's a kind of disastrous past, because this storm of history has swept all this rubble, and there's all this accumulated wreckage just gathering in the angel's wake whilst he keeps being blown backwards into the future, and he can't go back. The angel of history can't go back and change things, because the storm is blowing it into the future. All you can do is just see the detritus build up at its feet. But I suppose what the angel could do is recognise the detritus. If we are all the storm is progress in Benjamin. Progress is progressing us, moving us away from the explosion out of paradise, the fall or the Big Bang, or however you want to conceptualise that. The prime event that resulted in human consciousness. And here we are being blown into the future with the wreckage strewn out at our feet. All we can do is kind of try and make sense of it, or that pattern of wreckage there looks a little bit like, let's call that patriarchy. That pattern of wreckage looks like it might be something called power relations. Something like that. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. But that's the kind of story of that, isn't it? And maybe from that you can think about just modifying your journey a little bit. Just change it slightly. I don't know. But anyway, if the viewpoint of sociology and the viewpoint of the softer sciences is recognises primacy but can't see it quite, can't go back there, recognises that you can't go to fundamentals, or that fundamentals are just constructs, you're just guessing what the primacy was because you're too far away from it now, then that's a really different position to an acceptance of primacy. I'm trying to avoid quantum physics because it's so tempting to go to quantum physics, but I'm not going to. So I'm switching metaphors in mid-flight here, but the other image I've got here is a kind of bridge. Because on the one hand, this is how I'm visualising it. Sorry, well, this is a bit silly. I have fundamentalists, and they're like this. This is my fundamentalist. Because they can't. It seems to me this is just the image I've got. They're in the basement. You know, they're at they have a particular attraction to prime moments and to foundations, and they always want to return to basics, and they always want to hang on to what they see as the most important things. They will, in conversation, they will constantly hark on about the things that come first, the presupposed ideas, presupposed meaning before and under. So they're laid down first and they're laid down at the bottom. So they'll be down here. People who are biological determinists always looking for that first moment which sets you off on the biological journey up Mount Improbable. And they're here at the bottom of the mountain, or possibly in the basement of the building. These are your fundamentalists. And at the other end, you've got the angels of history being blown into an unlikely future. We should have an image for that. They're like this. That's what they're like. I mean, maybe it's like an arch or something like that. Maybe it's an arch. Maybe rather than a building, you can think of this as a kind of a bridge to nowhere. Who's going to build a bridge? Sarah Palin. Anyway, you got like a bridge. So what we need is a kind of keystone science, don't you, or a keystone idea. Oh, at the far side, by the way, I think it's the poets and playwrights and musicians. Because they don't produce anything that we tend to think of as knowledge, although because I'm in a university I kind of do, but yeah, they're at the far side of the bridge. Or the arts, and plus religious people as well. I see religion as a kind of art practice. But they're over there. Fundamentalists are over here. We need a keystone. Because at the moment, it feels like they're coming from opposite sides. You know what I mean? You can't walk across right now because the scientists are lame, aren't they? Science without religion is lame, Einstein says. So they're stuck here, and you can't go across because because they can't move. They're attached to the fundamentals. And religion is blind science. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm taking blind to mean blind to where they came from, because they're obscured, they're occulted. So if we had a kind of keystone idea in the middle, and I'd probably make an argument for some. No, I couldn't make an argument. I was going to make an argument for kind of metaphysics, but that doesn't work. You need a keystone that holds the bridge up and allows you to traffic across smoothly. So you can go back here and look at the presuppositions, but they're not really presuppositions. And over here to I came up with this word with Vero yesterday, post-superpositionists. Post-superpositionalists. These are the, I guess I'm a post-superpositionalist. These are people who are, actually Teilhard de Chardin, he'd be the ideal post-superpositionalist. Teilhard de Chardin, the omega point. People who assume that the answers are at the end rather than the beginning. The axiomatic ideas. God is not something that starts the universe, it's something that finishes the universe. The Big Bang is at the end of time, not the beginning. Something like that. Anyhow, that's incoherent rambling. 6 o'clock in the morning, what do you expect? Anyhow, I want to keep this under I was going to say I want to keep it under 10 minutes. I'm already at 15. Never mind. Thanks very much. Very stimulating conversation.